including Siege Gang Commander, Skirk Prospector, Sting Scourger, Tin Street Hooligan, and Goblin Sharpshooter.
Goblin Sharpshooter going to be an absolute all-star here against Chris. Chris is going to need to try to combo as fast as possible, because if Brad can find that Sharpshooter, Chris is not going to be in a good place.
The War Chief will grant his goblins haste, so he can't hide and wait until Brad plays it and waits for it to lose summoning sickness. So it looks like we are going to get this match underway very shortly. Chris will be on the play as a result of having the second overall seed. He will have the play up until the finals, at which point, should they meet in a collision course, Dustin Taylor, as the number 1 overall seed, will be on the play.
And it looks like both of these are hometown heroes. Brad Campbell wearing a Purdue shirt.
Yeah. Both players playing tribal decks of their heart's desire in their hometown to a top 4 finish. So, and one of them's going to at least be in the finals.
Yeah, I mean, this is exciting that we have Goblins v. Elves in the semis of the Legacy.
This is fantastic. This is, oh my gosh. What would you rather be commentating than Elves versus Goblins, honestly?
Trying to think of something.
The Mud versus Blue-Black Tezzeret was lots of fun, but honestly, Elves and Goblins, like, so good.
Now, in this match, I think the major thing that Chris needs to worry about in Game 1 is Goblin Sharpshooter. I think that's the card he really has to be worried about. Besides that, Gem Palm Incinerator can interact with him, but that's about it.
Yeah, that's not... It's a lot like interacting with Elves with a Swords to Plowshares.
Yes. So, Chris Andersen, like, one way to handle Goblin Sharpshooter is to leave a Pendelhaven online, if your opponent is going to get to the mana where they can do that.
Both players mulliganing to 6, by the way.
Yes, and post-board, Brad Campbell will also have Pyrokinesis, which is quite strong against Chris Andersen.
Yes, Pyrokinesis, the red card in the cycle from alliances that also included Force of Will.
Mm-hmm.
Pyrokinesis, if you remove a red card and pay a life, you can deal 4 damage divided as you choose among any number of creatures.
Very powerful effect, especially when you consider Counterspell is 2 mana, Arc Lightning is 3 mana, and Pyrokinesis is better than Arc Lightning.
I think Pyrotechnics is the 4 damage divided as you choose.
Yes, and I believe that costs 5 or 6
mana?
That
cost 5. 4 colorless and a red, so yeah, quite good. I believe both players are mulliganing to 5 here.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's a little bit unfortunate for both players.
More unfortunate for Chris. Goblins can recover from a mulligan pretty well, whereas Elves does not do well when it mulligans a lot. It really needs specific hands to dig its way out of mulligans. Green Sun Zenith will probably help smooth that over a lot. Back when I played Elves and Extended, we did not have access to that, but I remember keeping some loose ones as long as I didn't have, you know, if I ever had like a 3-lander that was bad, like that just had 4 bad cards, I would obviously mulligan it. But I would keep a lot of looser hands that were just 2-land hands, just because the deck did not mulligan that well.
That's true, yeah. Now, a Glimpse of Nature can help dig Chris out of a mulligan like this, even a small one of maybe 2 or 3 cards.
Mm-hmm.
But he will also need to have that in his opening hand, in addition to lands and creatures. So he was going to need a specific grouping of cards to be able to dig his way out. Players drawing their 5-card hands. Looks like Chris is going to throw his 5 back.
Yeah.
Brad looks like he's going to keep his 5.
So Chris now on 4 cards.
On 4 cards on the play.
And yeah, that's not a good place to be.
No. Oh, someone on Twitter pointing out Pyrokinesis does not require a life payment. I did not know that. Chris is going to go to 4 cards here. This does not look too good for Andersen.
Yeah, there's a... it's very funny when both players have mulliganed into Oblivion and have to play against each other, especially if both hands kind of do nothing.
Yes.
Steve Sadin once told me that his favorite kind of Magic to play was when both people are either playing with terrible limited decks, or both people are playing on with crippling mulligans.
Yes.
Because neither person is doing anything. You're just like squeaking whatever you can.
Yep. Trying to squeeze any tiny bit of advantage you can out of it.
Yep.
Yep. I know that the when the Ruel brothers face each other in a Pro Tour, in the early rounds, they mulligan to 0 to see who happens to be more blessed that day. So Chris is going to keep his 4. We're going to see Cavern of Souls, presumably naming Goblin, and an Ether Vial. Chris draws his card and passes without playing a land.
Ooh, and with a port from Brad, that might be rough. And an Incinerator, too.
Yeah.
So
should Andersen ever find a land this game? That's not the right one.
Well, he has 2 of them.
Oh, Chris kept in past turn 1. My apologies.
Yeah, I'm Chris with the Cradle in hand. You don't really want to play the Cradle on turn 1 because it doesn't do anything. And the Goblins deck does have Wastelands and things like that, so if you keep a 1-lander, of course you're on 4 cards, which is why you kept the 1-lander that was only a Gaia's Cradle, and you have that Cradle in your hand, there's really no reason to play it because it's just going to get Wastelanded.
Right.
And then
he of course played it because he drew a second Cradle.
Yes.
And so he wanted to have Brad not use his mana to tap down the Cradle.
Yeah, now the port tapped the Cradle, but not really doing much. Yeah. Cradle at this point.
Brad looks like he has a Matron and a Sting Scourger in his hand among 2 of his 4 cards.
And now with a mulligan of 4, you often some pretty awkward things happen. Brad, despite a mulligan of 5, he's playing Goblins, so he just gets all this natural card advantage, as we're going to see now. So Sting Scourger going to come down
and bounce the Llanowar Elf just as an unsummon there.
Yeah, that was a pretty aggressive Sting Scourger.
Wasteland on Cradle, interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's just about the only target there. Now the Vial now can start putting Matron into play. So what's going to happen is Brad is going to Vial and Matron on Chris's end step, search up Goblin Sharpshooter, and then Vial and Goblin Sharpshooter. And
there's another Cradle from Chris.
That's not going to work out very well for
nope.
Our good friend Chris Andersen. Chris, surprisingly, Brad did not tap down that forest with the port, which
so he's going to violate the Sharpshooter that he has already in hand. That was one of the other cards. Chris has decided he's seen enough of Game 1.
Yes,
having mulliganed to 4 on the play, not playing a land for the first 2 turns of the game.
Mulliganing to 4 as elves and playing against the natural Sharpshooter draw. Pretty rough.
Pretty rough. Not the easiest game in the world for Chris Andersen to try to win there, and he decides to move along. Now, moving on to the sideboards. Looks like Brad has 3 Pyrokinesis. He also has, that's about it.
Yeah, the Pyrokinesis are about the only cards he has to bring in here.
Pyrokinesis is pretty much the only card that we see here.
Chris, I don't think he really has anything to bring in here. He has Mortarpod. Yeah, I guess you do bring in Mortarpod here. It's this has to be a matchup where you want it.
Yeah.
I think it's.
So we have another trivia question for you. This is for 6 months of SCG Premium. Our question we have for you now are: there are 3 vanilla creatures in Andersen Restored. Name any one of them. Vanilla creatures, of course, being creatures that have no abilities, just flavor text, or sometimes are full art, like Blind Phantasm and Feromi Nomad from Future Sight.
Yes.
Things like that. But
Blind Phantasm, the 2/3 for 2 and a blue.
Yeah.
Fury Nomad, 4 and a red for a 4/4.
Right, but these happen to have flavor text. So there are 3 vanilla creatures in Andersen Restored. Name any one of them, and you might be able to win 6 months of Star City Games Premium.
It's pretty exciting. Now, again, this is Jacob Van Lunen, and I'm being joined by Ruben Bressler. We're here in Indianapolis, Indiana, bringing you guys coverage of the Star City Games Legacy Open. We're in the semifinals right now, about to go to Game 2. where I'm sorry.
Chris Andersen lost to Brad Campbell.
Where Brad Campbell is up a game against Chris Andersen, playing his Goblins deck. Both players mulliganed into oblivion that game. Chris went down to 4 cards, and Brad went down to 5 cards. Brad had the natural sharpshooter draw on 5 cards, so pretty strong there.
Yep. Chris was at major disadvantage in several facets of the game. He was on the draw with both players mulliganing. He mulled 2 fewer cards than Brad, and he missed his first 2 land drops. And Brad had the natural sharpshooter draw with the other vial. So was not particularly good for Team Elves. Twitter is alive with the sound of elves and goblins. So if you have something to chime in with about elves versus goblins here on our feature match, feel free to join in. We have hashtags of Team Elves and Team Goblins. If you want to make your voice heard, feel free to.
And just like this, we're starting to see that. Just like this, we're starting to see that maybe Grizzlebrand doesn't need to be banned.
Yeah.
You know, we have a top 8 without any Grizzlebrands in it. You know, just a few weeks ago, we had quite a few Grizzlebrand decks.
Yeah.
Every single week.
Gristleband was a popular hashtag for a little while.
Yes, it was.
Sneak and Show was in the finals 2 straight weeks. Reanimator then became one of the most popular decks, putting both Jerry Thompson and Max Tietz in the top 8 of the Invitational. But there were no Gristlebrands in the top 8 of Star City Games Indianapolis in the Legacy portion. The Open, I should say.
So, I mean, looking at this, do we know if Dustin or Rudy has won a game yet?
We do not have that information.
Yeah, I think that Rudy probably has an advantage there, especially because he has those parishes post-board.
Yeah.
Oh, we're right into this game, so...
Yes, these players keep their 7s this time, so we will actually get to see a game of Magic. Chris leads off with Llanowar Elves. Brad has a Goblin Lackey. Now we see that Dustin is up game 1 in the other match. Rugg is up a game against Rudy.
The turn 1 Lackey from Brad Campbell. Going to force Chris to jump wire trade with that and choose which of these elves is the least valuable to him at this point in the game. He can just Nettle Sentinel.
Yeah, he has a Nettle Sentinel in his hand.
And, you know, we've seen Chris combo off a few times here without even having a Nettle Sentinel, which is, it doesn't really happen.
So Chris
often.
attacked for 1, and then played Nettle Sentinel and Llanowar Elves, and passed the turn back to Brad. Oof. Pyrokinesis from Brad. 3 creatures hit the bin. Lackey is going to hit and put in a sharpshooter. Oh my.
Woof.
What a a beating.
Yeah, so you can hear the crowd laughing as I mean, that's...
So the one of Scavenging Ooze came in for Chris. That's going to provide a 2/2. It will not immediately die to the sharpshooter.
It's true. It gives him something that's, you know, a little big.
Yeah.
It can get a little bigger.
That's going to get pretty big. I mean, that's a big game. So
in some ways.
So Scavenging Ooze throwing a little bit of clunkiness in the works.
Yeah, I mean, at least now he can use the forest that Brad is going to tap with the port to remove.
But this Lackey is going to hit again, and this is probably going to put in a Ringleader from Brad Campbell. Which,
yeah, and that's just going to be brutal.
That's just brutal. We have War Chief, Ringleader, and the other 2 lands will go on the bottom.
Yeah,
Ringleader into Ringleader, not exactly a fair thing to happen in Legacy. It's often been said that the best card draw spell played in Legacy is Goblin Ringleader.
Yes, I think before Jace got printed, I would be on board with that statement.
Yeah. So we have a pile driver joining the action.
And
many 1-1s in Chris Andersen's hand.
Not what you want when you're facing down a sharpshooter. And Scavenging is going to get a little bit bigger.
He's going to pass the turn back to Brad. Brad will be attacking with a 5-2 pile driver, assuming no other haste goblins enter the battlefield here.
I don't even know if he attacks this turn. I think he just... Oh, yeah, now he definitely attacks.
3. There we go.
Yeah,
and that's going to end the game. Brad Campbell defeats Chris Andersen in 2 games.
2 very
quick games. Yep. One of the games was a mold of 4 versus a mold of 5, in which Brad Campbell naturally drew his Goblin Sharpshooter on turn 3.
Yes, and the second game, not much closer. Brad had a turn 1 lackey, and when Chris played a bunch of guys that could block, Brad decided to follow up with a Pyrokinesis to plague win Chris Andersen, and then he was able to hit him with the lackey and drop the Sharpshooter into play.